I'm very excited to be moderating this panel of these illustrious investors on the stage. So quick introductions from closest to me on. So Hans Tung, he's managing partner at GGV Capital. Known for his eye, don't cringe, some of this sounds very glamorous. I'm sure you'll roll your eyes, but known for his eye for e-commerce, Hans' portfolio companies consist of 11 unicorns, or billion-dollar companies. They include Xiaomi, Wish, ByteDance, Slack, Airbnb, OfferUp, Peloton, Coinbase, Xiaohongshu, Meili, and SmartMe. Clapping, okay. Peter Wagner is founding partner of Wing. He focuses on big business technology, seeking out founders and opportunities that have the potential to transform and create explosive markets. Peter's led investments in dozens of early stage companies, many of which have gone to complete IPOs or successful acquisitions like FireEye, Insights One, Mobile Iron, Nimble Storage, and Fusion.io. Since leaving Excel in 2011 and founding Wing, he invests and helps exciting early stage businesses and technology ventures. And finally, Anne, who you just saw speak on the keynote, founding partner at Floodgate, seed stage VC based in Palo Alto. I don't know, I'm sure every time you hear this, you might cringe because that would just be my reaction, but it's well-deserved. She's called the most powerful women in startups by Forbes. Anne was one of the first investors in companies like Lyft and TaskRabbit and has been an early backer of many others, including Ayazdi, Xamarin, and ModCloth. All right, great. Well, I think because what a lot of you have in common, including, beyond being great investors, is what we call the Midas list. Of course, everyone wants to ask you what your predictions are and what you see as kind of the future. I think you're probably asked what investment sectors you're most bullish on. You probably hear that all the time. So I'm going to ask you something a little bit different because everyone kind of says sort of similar things. What demographics or customer segments are you maybe looking at most closely in terms of from an investment perspective, whether it's geographies or certain demographic profiles, because that obviously does dictate in some way the sectors that are being innovated on. Let's start with Anne.
So I do both consumer and enterprise, so those are very different demographics. On the consumer side, I'm still fascinated by what I would say, like the really young uns. So there's different trends that I just fundamentally don't understand, right? So a great example of that is Lil Miquela, which if any of you know, she's like a fake, kind of like a mannequin on Instagram who has a huge following and has all of the major brands, including Chanel, dressing her, paying to dress her. She has a real-life boyfriend who's actually a human being. And there's a whole story that goes along with this, and she has 2 million followers. It just shows you how little I understand about that demographic. Because it makes sense to apparently 2 million people plus. And so I think there's this incredible generational shift that's happening where people are entertained in a very different way, and so that's something that I'm trying to understand. So that's on the consumer side. On the enterprise side, I'm just deeply, deeply fascinated by the fact that there's this real interesting tension between privacy and intelligence. And so I come from a math modeling background, and there's sort of this need for data in order to train models, but people are becoming increasingly private about their data. And so how do you actually train on very small sets of data? There's new technology, new algorithms that continue to emerge, and that's an area that I've been spending a lot of time.
Peter.
Well, when we started Wing, we made the decision we were only going to focus on companies that were building technology products and services for business customers. So we spend zero time on the consumer. It's not that we don't think the consumer is great. When I was at Excel and when Gaurav was at Sequoia, we did, we're involved in a lot of consumer projects, but, we're big believers in focus. And, and so that's what we chose to focus on. Specifically within, the wide range, products for businesses, that's still an incredibly broad universe from, very large enterprises to small businesses to even individual business people. that are organically adopting products and dragging them into the workplace. I think a lot of our most interesting projects actually start in the mid-market, though, and so that's probably the fattest part of the curve, and this is where you can still get pretty high adoption velocity, but also transaction sizes and customer values that can support the sort of go-to-market model that many of the types of products that our companies develop tend to require.
I think all three of us have very different perspectives on what we look at and how we plan for the future. We actively invest in U.S. and China for the last 18 years, and then over the last 5 years, we started to look at Southeast Asia, as 2 of our 6 partners are from Singapore originally. And then very recently, led our largest Series A check, its investment in Brazil. And it's a company that's going after the Latin American market. So by traditional VC standard, it is extremely unfocused because we are in 4 different regions. But from where we think the future is going, I started my career investing in '97, and that was the year that Jack Ma hosted Jerry Yang in China as a translator for the Chinese government. And when Jerry went to China in '97, the world was dominated by Silicon Valley's tech companies. There is no internet outside of Silicon Valley. And the world had probably about 50, 60 million internet users. Fast forward only 20 years later, then the world now has 3.5 billion internet users. And what we have seen from developments in US and then China, and later on India, Indonesia, Brazil, other markets, is that as smartphone penetration increases, as more people get on the internet, new business models emerge, new innovation become possible because now there are more consumers who could be using it, and then the society start to change because of increased efficiency. And China changed a lot in the last 20 years between '97 to now, and we're seeing some of the similar trends emerging in other countries regions where there's a large block of young users that's coming online. So being in the valley in '97, you have the luxury of just doing stuff that's creative and not thinking about too much because you're at the beginning of a new revolution. When you are 20 years into a trend, you start to have to look at things a lot more critically from a society's development standpoint to figure out what are the natural, what are the things that's happening that make it possible for big business to be built. In '97, there was no Alibaba. When Jerry met Jack again in 2005 in Pebble Beach to talk about a deal, Alibaba became valued at $5 billion. Most of our investment made in Alibaba was done 2 years earlier at a expensive valuation back in 2003 of $180 million. And fast forward today, Alibaba's worth $400 billion, and we think they're undervalued because of the China-U.S. trade war situation. So when things can happen dramatically like that, it's not because just one person or 2 persons' ability to see the future. It is because the world is changing, the society is changing, and tech internet is playing a huge role in making that change possible. So knowing how that works, to me, is the most important thing, more than any important prediction that any one of us can make.
Right. So I guess while I have Hans, so this is fresh on my mind just because I recently came back from China a couple weeks ago, and I think there was a recent South China Morning Post, who, if many of you might read, that quoted you saying you're looking for firms that can tackle 2nd or 3rd tier cities in China, build ecosystems, looking for emerging, founders who are building in emerging markets. And I guess especially for a lot of the people in the room, I know we have a lot of folks who've come in from overseas, but certainly in Silicon Valley or the US, like what do you think it is that Silicon Valley investors get wrong about China, or what are the myths that you want to dispel about kind of how it relates to innovation, or just like what is happening over there that you hear a lot of that's just not really the case?
Right. I think one easy example to use is, do we build an app, at least on the consumer side, that's focused, single purpose, clean, and get people to start using it, and then maybe do more later? You look amazing product like WhatsApp hasn't changed that much, or Craigslist hasn't changed that much, but a lot of people use it and you monetize it well with ads, especially in the case of Craigslist. Then over the last 5-10 years, as you know, there's a concept called super app, and this basically app that tries to do everything, like the Meituan model in China, which is a little bit of Uber, a little bit of Uber Eat, has a little bit of Expedia, has a little bit of Yelp, has a little bit of Coupang. I mean, how unfocused is that company? I mean, come on, make up your mind. But it is listed in Hong Kong, and its valuation between $50 to $60 billion. They raised $10 billion to get there, and emerging, becoming the sort of Amazon of local services in China. And the founders are investing in companies that are copying their model around the world. I mean, copying from China? What's going on? I thought everything in China copied from the U.S. So it's just dramatically different how in 10 years so many things changed. And if you look at only something one point in time, it's very easy to make a mistake, because you see the parts of an elephant. You don't know what an elephant looks like. Maybe it's the trunk, it's the legs, it's the tail. You don't see the whole picture. But when you start seeing things 2-3 years at every interval, you see how things are shifting, then you see something else fundamentally is going on. As long as the offline world is extremely inefficient, yet there's urbanization, yet there's smartphone penetration, then there's more things for internet companies to do. So I will even argue in emerging markets, it's better to be than in Silicon Valley, where you can make even bigger impact by building companies that can end up fulfilling a lot of the demands that users may have, but cannot be fulfilled by the existing offline infrastructure.
All right, so switching gears a little bit, so this question is for Peter. So a couple of years after Wing launched, I think you had mentioned either in a blog post or a press article that it obviously would have been easier to raise a mega fund, $1 billion fund, but capital has gravity. Too much of it would pull our strategy towards larger deals, later stages, and your firm wanted to be very much focused on the early stage. So of course, in this past couple of years, there's been the rise, I guess, global surge in the late stage funding around the $1 billion funds and SoftBank and these mega funds kind of popping up everywhere. What do you think the impact of this will be on the ecosystem at large? Maybe both the opportunities as well as the foreseen challenges of this.
Yeah, well, so we're in a time now where the capital market cycle is such that there's tremendous supply of capital trying to get into venture, trying to get into the startup ecosystem, and way more capital than there is responsible hands to manage it. And so what that has meant is that firms that have had some amount of success face a lot more demand than necessarily they're equipped to deal with. And so you can have two responses to that. You can say, bring it on, and I'll come up with a rationalization to explain why I should be managing more and more money. And we've seen a lot of firms do this, and assets under management have grown, quite a bit amongst established venture firms. And then you see new firms coming into existence that are also managing substantial amounts of capital. That's one response. Another response is to sort of stick to the strategy and just say what amount of capital is actually appropriate for the strategy that we're pursuing, the role that we're trying to play, the types of companies that we're trying to build. And my co-founder Gaurav Garg and I had both come from big venture firms. In fact, firms that we had participated in the scaling of. So, so we knew about big and, we knew about complicated and we sort of had gotten that out of our system. And in forming Wing, it was really about trying to play a unique role in the, the critical early stages for business technology companies and then really optimizing the team and the capital that we were going to be, investing in order to support that strategy. And so it is true that, we probably turn away, I think, like sort of $10 for every dollar that we accept into when we raise a fund. And some people find that surprising because all the companies that we invest in, growth is the goal. You're trying to grow. Paradoxically, in a venture firm, growth can be the enemy. And can actually take a very successful organization and make it, distinctly unsuccessful because the strategy will have to evolve, and you might not necessarily have as attractive an opportunity set or as appropriate a team or as sort of well-functioning a set of processes and decision-making and all the rest that goes with that new strategy. So, it's just kind of it's the era we live in right now. I mean, there's more cash that wants to get into the system than at other points in the cycle. But it's a cycle. Make no mistake. The wheel will turn, and then we'll be dealing with a different set of conditions.
I'm also curious, especially for Anne, since you are backing founders potentially as either one of or the first investor at the early stages, how you've seen this phenomena also impact your own portfolio, or how you think about it in terms of kind of the massive amounts of capital. I think you kind of touched upon it in your keynote. But
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Peter here. First of all, we've experienced it as an institution. We had the same fund size, $75 million for 3 funds, and we just refused to take additional dollars. This last fund, we were intentional about it because we had added partners to the program, and we'll stay at this level until we feel like we've mastered it, and we may stay here forever, because we like sort of where we're at. The place where I've seen sort of the influx of capital really impact companies, number one is just through my experience with Lyft. I funded them in 2010. I put in $750,000 into the company. The founders were paying themselves $40,000 a year. As a board, Manu, Kumar, and I had to suggest maybe they should give themselves a living wage. They were operating out of a house in Palo Alto. And back then, I didn't have an office either, and so we were sneaking into the dorms at Stanford so we could use our common room for a boardroom, right? And I managed to get office space in Palo Alto for $3.25 a square foot. And you fast forward now 10 years, and I guess now it's 8 years, and people who we would have originally paid $70,000 to get started working in a startup, they're being paid at least double. That same office space in Palo Alto is now going for $10 a square foot. And I look around me, and that is the impact of the capital that's flooded into our ecosystem. It hasn't actually necessarily resulted in a ton of better startups. They're just, some of that money is just going into the hands of real estate investors, right? And we should be honest about that. And so I see those kinds of changes, but then you fast forward even with their journey in Lyft, I remember them raising their Series C and the speed at which the check came in, and then every subsequent round being of the same vein, just the amount of capital, the appetite for shares in the company continuing to grow and outperform what I could have possibly imagined. And so I think that there is this incredible desire to come in to the tech ecosystem in Silicon Valley, in the United States, now extending into China and to other geographies, because of sort of macroeconomic conditions, interest rates, all sorts of things. But it creates a real pressure. And as Peter said, I've lived through the early 2000s. I was working during that period, and I was in venture my second day of work on 9/11. So when I say I've seen cycles, I've seen cycles. Like 2008, people say it was terrible. That was nothing, nothing compared to 2001, right? And so the optimism of these founders and investors who have only lived through 8 years of a bull market is really frightening on some level. And as Peter said, they are cycles, and so things that go up will come down, and who sticks around for that, who figures out how to get their companies through that period, that's where the real work starts.
So I guess on the note with Lyft, since you invested in 2010, obviously one of the first believers before anyone believed in the company, I think, so hindsight is always 20/20, of course, but what was it about the team at the time that made you take that bet? And now today, especially as the company is, I guess, expected to go public in the next year or so, why do you think they're going to overtake Uber?
So I have to say, caveat all of this with, I made a lot of bad investment decisions in that same period of time, and so to say I saw it all would be just completely farcical. I think the thing that attracted me to Lyft at the time was called Zimride. I liked areas where there were no other companies, and so I always have gravitated towards stories of why something is even bigger than it seems. And so the story that John Zimmer spoke about was that he had a professor at Cornell who talked about the impact of transportation on the global economy, but really particularly in the United States. So he had maps that showed what happened when canals came in, what happened when railways came in, and really what happened when highways came in, and really changes the face of the United States. And he sat there and spoke about what he thought the next transportation revolution would be. And if you go back to that period, it was really a time when we were really excited about social networks, and that's what literally almost every founder came in to talk about, was either a social network or what was going to happen when mobile took off. And here's this guy talking about, with Logan, what's going to happen in cars. The only comp we had was actually Zipcar at the time, and I knew Scott Griffith, so we spoke about what was happening in the transportation space. Really, it was kind of a dead industry, and so that's what really spoke to me. And to be honest, I was like, no one knew who I was. I was still a PhD candidate at Stanford trying to start up a VC, and so no one really would talk to me, and so I had to find these entrepreneurs who were sort of really off the beaten path, and Zimride just happened to be one of those where it just spoke to me. They were desperate enough to take my check, and so we were off and running at that point. And then why do I think that they're going to overtake Uber? So, I mean, I don't even think about, I don't think about the competition. I think the reason why Lyft has done well is because they've played their own game. There are, a lot of other ride-sharing apps that were out there that really tried to outcompete Uber in Uber's game. And I think that Lyft has always decided to operate on their own terms. And they have their own set of rules, their own culture, their own way of thinking about the world, the way they see the world. And I love the fact that they continue to execute upon that.
Wonderful. So I guess a question for the panel, and whoever feels most compelled can speak up first, but love to hear from the three of you. So in the last panel, Renata from Lex Capital talked about that value of trust as it relates to technology. I think we can all agree to some level that in the past couple of years, a lot of that trust has either been tested or broken when it comes to the tech companies that we use and have funded every day. And some question about VCs having that responsibility on who they back and holding those CEOs accountable, both as investors and potentially board members in these companies. How do you think about that in terms of holding your CEOs accountable, whether it is something with their product or their employees or whatnot? What is the role of the investor, or maybe how you think about it for yourselves as firms, beyond just kind of the legal responsibility, even if you're a board member, but maybe potentially on a moral or ethical level? How do you ensure that those companies are having a positive impact, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a really core issue. I mean, I'm glad you brought it up, and it's one that, goes right to the heart of the role of what an early stage lead investor should be. We always think about that as, sort of the trusted business partner to the founders, the person that the founder calls at midnight when they're wrestling with some really difficult decision, and not just in the first 18 months. But through the life of the company, because the relationships and the trust, indeed, that's formed in the crucible of the earliest stages becomes just a pillar of a great company throughout its life cycle. And so, we have numerous companies where we've been involved for 10 plus years. And those relationships that were forged, in the first 6 months, the first 12 months, just wrestling with really difficult issues way before it was obvious, way before others showed up wanting to get involved with the parade. That's the stuff that really helps form the backbone of a company. And, I think a lot of us got very concerned when the whole founder-friendly movement was rippling along several years ago. Yeah, I think there was some good in that notion around the type of relationship that could be had and needed to be had between founders and investors. But there was, to a large degree, it was a bit of a cynical marketing tactic as well by some new entrants into the venture industry that were trying to differentiate themselves from whatever other product was out on the market, and so as our industry over-rotated, as it tends to, we sort of lost this accountability thing, and you ended up with investors and board members who thought their role was basically to cheer or applaud or, blindly support. And what was lost in the wash was this kind of mutual respect. And, there's a delicate tension, right, between holding someone accountable and just being a jerk, and so kind of the best in our business really know where to be on that spectrum and at what moment. Because different times in the founder's journey or the company's journey call for different roles to be played and different types of interventions, and so being sensitive to that is really part of the art of being a really good early stage venture investor. And I'm glad to see this concept coming back up.
I guess Hans or Anne, what do you think?
For us, since we invest in multiple geographies, it's very interesting to see how founders behave. And there's a lot of media perception, portrayal of certain stereotypes. But for us, being on the ground in multiple geographies, you do see that they are founders who fit the San Francisco bro type of culture and behavior. And so I agree with Peter in that respect that it's good that it's not now certain funds have done certain things to make it easier, and people have sort of waking up. There's a lot of issues that have been underreported, and brave women have come out and done that. And that's happening not only in San Francisco, even LA and New York, and you see it in other countries as well now, which is an amazing thing, and that should be done. So I think having internet does help to the board to work with the founders and to correct certain practices in every firm. At the same time, we also see a lot of founders who don't fit the Ivy League and other from Google, from Facebook, that kind of a background, succeeding well in doing amazing things around the world. And so it's good always to have new entrants in the market. If Anne wasn't a PhD student at Stanford, she may not have been able to invest and support Lyft. And that's a great story. And for us, we love to invest in founders who, just from the natural drive, ambition, and passion, not because of the background and the schools and the company, that was the reason why they succeed. Again, going back to someone like Jack Ma, I mean, he applied to a job at KFC, 25 people applied, 24 got in. He's the only one who was rejected. And why would you invest in someone like that who consistently have been rejected by society? So for any VC who's lucky enough to be part of that journey, it changes the way you look at things. I remember in 2010, when I invested in Xiaomi, there was no business plan. It was just crazy idea by 3 founders. And the founding team, one of them worked at Google, but has never worked in a startup. The second person has done a startup for 18 years, but the outcome was only $400 million. Everyone said, something's not right with him because he worked so hard, but that's all he got. Then the third founder was still like part-time. And what do you want to do? You want to do something that no startup has ever done in the history of handsets. So it's stuff like that that makes us feel good that we played a small role in some amazing founder success. And you guys are doing something similar as well, and that's why it's fun and why I get up in the morning every day do this. Even though I really don't have to do this anymore, but it's just so much fun being involved and helping young founders and do something that's amazing.
And any thoughts?
Not much to add here. I mean, like I'm sort of even within our firm, I'm the tiger mom. That's what they refer me to. and I will oftentimes tell the founders that I'm working with, I'm not great at just diving in and investing after meeting someone for 15 minutes because they kind of need to know what they're getting. And part of what they're getting is what I call the truth teller, right? And I've been in board situations where I'm actually the board observer, and I'm actually going through the process of helping the CEO realize that they're not the CEO anymore. And I also never really liked sort of just blindly being founder friendly, because I think that's actually, you're not really being kind to the founder, because there's an opportunity cost both for the company as well as for the person in terms of their development if you aren't being completely honest with them. And so I have sort of a general rule that if they can't handle the truth, as it'll come from me, then it's probably not going to be a successful relationship. And so, one of the part of the art that I've really had to learn is that just because I know the answer right now doesn't mean right now is the right time to communicate that answer. And so really figuring out how to work with founders to get them to the right point within their journey, and also have the company adapt to different parts of that founder journey is also something that I just have to learn along the way. But I also believe that the role of the founder, the role of the VC is not to be a cheerleader. If that's all you're there to be, then you shouldn't be on the board. You're there for governance, and that you should be there to actually be a champion in the right way. And that's something that I think I'm still learning. I learn it from other board members that I watch, but also in the interactions that I have with founders. And I'm also really grateful that we're getting back to a point where that is valued amongst founders.
I feel like there's some parallels between being a board member and being a parent. Mm-hmm. Maybe a little more meddling as parents, but
A lot more.
A lot more.
A lot more.
I'm learning that with the balance on that. So last question, just because this is pretty timely and it's an extension of kind of what we're talking about. So I believe this past weekend, the state of California enacted a new law which requires, I think, publicly traded companies in the state of California to place at least one woman on their board of directors by the end of 2019 or face a penalty. So again, question for the panel, how much do you believe that governments or the powers that be beyond just the investors or the board should really step in and support the equality of either the boardroom, or even, again, could be taken a step further in terms of who gets funding, or like however you want to look at it. But do you think this is a good thing, or are you worried about it?
I think in particular instances, you can argue that it was something that will help the industry to evolve faster pace. In general, even having substantial of our investments in China, most of what people in the press read about how Chinese government support AI and dump all that funding, it's actually not true, in the sense that you ask most founders in China, they'd rather not have the government support anything. Just make sure the high-speed rail works, make sure the planes arrive on time. It's internet access works. That's all you need to do. Because usually funding by government into these sectors are not. Let's put it this way: the skill set you need to win government grants is different skill set that you need to build a real business. So sometimes just because you're good at government funding, usually means that you're not as good as building a real business. And most of the companies that we have seen succeed in China have not taken government money. If they got government funding in terms of loans or bank debt, it tends to be after companies are already sizable and the government is coming in as a cheerleader. So in general, we think that the government should focus on infrastructure building and allow the founders to be who they are and build amazing companies.
Yeah, I think this might be one of those cases where you can wholeheartedly agree with the objective and disagree with the mechanism. And so I'm, generally leery of government fiat involved in anything as delicate and nuanced as how to build a great company. And so, the unintended consequences often emerge later.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the intention of having more diversity on boards is obviously something I greatly support. I'm very involved with All Raise. I think on the VC side, it's actually absolutely critical. But it kind of goes back to when I was applying to colleges. I remember getting into one of these engineering schools, and a guy walked up to me at my school and said, "Oh, you got in there because you're a girl." And it immediately made me not want to go there because I never wanted that shadow to hang over me. I like the fact that the boards that I'm on, I've earned my way on there. I'm either a check writer or I've been asked to be on these boards, and it's not mandated. That said, I believe in the ultimate objective of where they want to get to.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much, all three of you, for being here. It was great to hear your perspectives. Thank you.